Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, it's been kind of a long time in coming. I've been promising to do an analysis on the statement that Chris Watts wrote to Graham Coder when he arrived at the station on Tuesday night, the 14th of August. And what is quite interesting is it was Detective Bormover's idea to sort of hand over the interrogation to Coder, and I think that was a brilliant. Obviously the detective knew Coder probably from experience, and it was a brilliant choice because Coder kind of had quite a gentle manner, but he was also no nonsense, and he was able to cleverly manipulate Watts but also put him at ease, and so that was a great choice from the detective. One of the reasons the detective said that he didn't want to interrogate Watts himself was it would have kind of been going over the motion. So he'd already gotten a version from Watts, and so the idea was pass him over to somebody else, someone who's very good at this sort of thing, and have that person sort of pretend to be coming in cold, to have absolutely no knowledge of anything. And not only that, to put Chris Watts at ease, also kind of understate the fact that he was an FBI guy. Oh, well, I just investigate burglaries. And that kind of thing would put Chris Watts, although I think he was uncomfortable, it would make him think, well, maybe I can get away with this. So we're going to be looking at page 1151, which is Coder's notes from that interrogation, and then also 1152 and 1153, which is Chris Watts's handwritten narrative, right? Before we get started, a big thank you to the couple of hundred people who have subscribed to the channel. I see we are almost at 25,000. I guess by the time, or perhaps shortly after the video goes up, we may have reached that milestone. Thank you very much to one and all of you. Welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So it's actually page 1151 where we get just a smattering of Agent Coder's, FBI Agent Graham Coder's notes. And right at the top on the right hand side, he writes "wow" with an exclamation mark. And he talks about the answer that Chris Watts gave, talking about an act of evil, right? And I think the reason why he's saying that is because he's kind of intuited that this is not just a disappearance and that he's actually already got his man. The fact that Chris Watts is not sort of talking about, well, I think my family have disappeared. I think this could have happened. The fact that he's already kind of defining it, labeling it as an act of evil, means that he knows what happened. And so that is quite an incisive remark, but also an incisive perception from the agent. So I don't know how good you are at handwriting, but the other thing that he seemed to highlight was something about, looks like, tackle me, bash my head. I'm not quite sure whether that is what is written down, but you can go and check it out. A couple of things that he highlights here are medical issues. He refers to the word search. Infidelity is third from the top. Not quite sure what is written there. I think it's morning routine. And then he talks about timing not working. So that is maybe something that he wanted to question Chris Watts about. He also writes down their change of clothes, which is definitely quite pertinent. And then sort of difficult things to figure out from his notes. Haircut color, wake her up, log in, flip-flops, kids' beds not made. So that is definitely something he highlighted. That's something I highlighted in my narrative post-truth. You might think that that's not a big deal, but it's quite a big deal. He talks about 319, meaning survey 319, that he was there for an hour, and he was at survey 1129 for just 20 minutes. And then at 1029, a pumping unit. I'm not quite sure what that 6 refers to. I don't know if it's 6 hours. I'm not quite sure what that refers to. Or 6 people or whatever. Anyway, then he says, why, question mark, went to work, why didn't you call 911, got fat, marital discord, talks about friends, why, infidelity, route of truck to work, alternate light source. It's quite an interesting thing. I'm not quite sure what that's about. And then he's written next to that, ask about the route of the truck to work, ask about the alternate light source, ask about his Facebook deactivated, ask about the pictures. So I'm not sure if that's the pictures of his children that he would have in front of him. And then he also writes down, I'm your guy, call me, we'll do this again. So these are kind of notes to himself, and also notes that he's taken while Chris Watts is talking, things that he wants to ask him, and then things that he's intuiting, I guess. And given there's not a lot of notes here. It's not bad what he sort of picked up on the first night, right? So now we go to Chris Watts's statement. This is from page 1152, and what's quite interesting is the title of the page is Neighborhood Witnesses. So it's not like suspect's version of events or something like that. And so that is already going to put him a little bit at ease that he's just kind of a witness, right? And then the page starting from the beginning, please include every detail you can remember and tell us what happened. Now, before we even get to that, what is quite interesting with this page is that there are virtually no crossed out words. In fact, on this first page, on 1152, I can't find a single word that is crossed out. It's also quite neat and legible. The writing seems to be slightly smaller than Coder's writing to some extent. The numbers are quite big, which corresponds to that note that he supposedly wrote in North Carolina. The numbers are quite big. The letters are fairly small. If we go to the next page, there is one obvious thing that looks like it's been corrected. It hasn't been scratched out, but it's certainly been kind of overwritten. And it's something about check on, I don't know if he was going to say the family, but he changed it to my family. Now, this is something I've always known. I'm not an expert in handwriting analysis, but I've always known this from my research into many cases, into the handwriting of many people. They say a trait of a dishonest person is that you won't draw a line through a word and then rewrite it. You'll write over it. And so in other words, you cover over your error instead of being sort of quite honest and saying, okay, I made a mistake, line through it, let me start again, kind of thing. And it's not an exact science. It doesn't mean that you're a murderer if you do that, but it's not a good sign if you see that. And now, what is quite interesting, there's just one incidence of this in 1.5 pages. So it's quite interesting that. You could argue that there are a couple more, like at 5 a.m., that a.m. looks a little bit heavy, and where he writes downstairs, that also looks like something is going on there. But besides that, it's fairly neat and fairly kind of, well written. in the sense that it's tidy, it's not lots of mistakes, not written all over the place. So the other two things that I want to quickly point out are the fact that he spelled Shanann's name without a comma. And bear in mind, the very next day, when Agent Lee polygraphed him, right in the beginning, she asked, how do you spell her name? And then he said with an apostrophe. And yet he doesn't even spell her name that way. So it's kind of strange, isn't it? Then there was something else I wanted to mention here. Okay, so yeah, I guess it is, the document states start from the beginning, and Chris Watts starts at 1:48 a.m. He starts at the moment Shanann arrives home. Would you start at that point if you were him? I think a more logical time to have started would have been somewhere around about 11 o'clock. In other words, at night, to say that, or even before that, just saying that Shanann was away on a business trip, and then she was going to fly back, and her flight was delayed. Now, the reason he probably wants to start at 1:48 a.m. is because he doesn't want to talk about what he was doing at 11 o'clock at night. And I mean, what he was doing, he was talking to his mistress. He actually missed Shanann's final call and text to him. So the final time Shanann reached out to him on her phone, he actually missed that because he was busily ensconced in a conversation with Kissinger that very night. And if that doesn't show how addicted he was, in the last minutes and hours of his wife's life, he couldn't bother to sort of be available for her on his phone. That's how desperate he was to sort of get back to his mistress. That is just showing you to what extent he was really addicted to her and caught up in the idea of being with her and desperate to kind of get back to her. So anyway, he starts off at 1:48. He talks about the doorbell detected a visitor. The neighbor's camera that faces the driveway didn't pick up anyone. That's also a very interesting thing, is that he immediately refers to the neighbor's camera, so he's aware of it, and he's trying to sort of convey to the law enforcement that, don't worry, it didn't pick anything up. In other words, don't go to the neighbor's camera, it's not going to pick anything up. And of course, it did pick something up. You'd have to concentrate to see it, but it certainly wasn't very easy to catch those little fragments, but they certainly were there. And so in the very first line, it seems like he's trying to muddy the evidence that there is on him. Talking about the neighbor's camera facing the driveway didn't pick anyone walking up to the house, which suggests that if it didn't pick anyone walking up to the house, it didn't pick anyone up leaving. I'm just saying it is interesting that he highlights that in his very first sentence, isn't it? He highlights something that is to his advantage in the very first, well, in the second line, but in the very first statement that he makes. Then he jumps to 2 a.m. Shanann gets into bed with me. Now, if you think about that, what happens between 1:48 and 2 a.m.? 12 minutes go by. He doesn't say that, was he aware of Shanann arriving home? In other words, was he lying in bed and there was some kind of blip or beep or sound on his phone that alerted him? Or did he find that out the next morning? He doesn't really address that. That is also something I'm not sure that the authorities addressed either. But if they did, let me know. But anyway, he then jumps to 12 minutes later, and now he perceives Shanann getting into bed with him. Now, in his story, he's in the main bed, in the main bedroom. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that he planned to sleep in that bed with Shanann that night. Again, I don't think he wants to be too on the chin about that, because it wouldn't make sense if he wasn't sleeping in that bed, because they hadn't been sleeping together for a week or two before. It wouldn't make sense why they would have that conversation the next morning, because Shanann would already know about it. So the way that he's kind of telling the story, and we'll get to it in a second, it's kind of happens at 4:15, I guess, is that he's kind of making the point that Shanann, that he decided that morning that things aren't working out, right? And that isn't kind of how it was working out. They'd kind of been bickering and kind of at loggerheads for around about 2 weeks, at least. But we know for a fact that they were kind of not getting on, not touching one another, not sleeping in the same bed. He was certainly not caring about her for at least 2 weeks before the crime happened. But and he doesn't allude to that here, he simply makes it seem like it's normal. He sleeps in the bed and Shanann gets into bed with him as usual. But I think when Shanann arrived home, I don't know whether she would have expected him to be in bed. That's quite a difficult question. At 4 a.m. his alarm goes off for work, and I proceed to get ready for work. Now, normally at 4 a.m. I think he would get up and work out in the gym. And since he didn't work out that morning, what was he doing? And then he says, at 4:15 a.m. I slide into bed and begin having a conversation with Shanann. I don't think that happened, but according to this, 15 minutes go by after he wakes up. And what does he do? Well, according to him, he proceeds to get ready. He doesn't really say what that proceeding to get ready is, but maybe it's getting dressed, maybe it's having a shower, maybe it's packing his food, but he doesn't say it. The other thing to point out is Shanann arrives at 1:48, and then it's suddenly 2 a.m., and I think what he's implying is that Shanann arrives home, showers, changes, and then gets into bed. I think that's what he's implying with that 12-minute gap, because you have a similar around 12 to 15-minute gap, 15-minute gap from 4 to 4:15 a.m. where Watts is getting ready. So that seems to be what is behind that timestamp. He talks about he slides into bed and begins having a conversation with Shanann. He doesn't talk about waking her up. He doesn't say whether she's asleep or awake. He begins having a conversation with Shanann. The conversation involves putting the house up for sale. That's also something that doesn't make any sense, because they'd already spoken about that previously. Apparently, Shanann had contacted our realtor a week prior via email about this as well. So yeah, you have a lot of information. The first thing about 148 is like 1 or 2 lines. The second is barely one sentence. The next one is barely one line as well. And now you have this long thing dealing with 4:15 a.m. And it's as soon as he starts talking about the house for sale, he jumps to the past. He starts talking about something that happened in the past. Shanann had contacted our realtor in the past, a week earlier, via email. He's not talking about what's happening right here. He's suddenly jumping out of that time frame. Then he says the conversation also involved moving along with the separation. This was an emotional topic due to the fact we have 2 beautiful daughters and another baby on the way. So when he says moving along with the separation, it's almost like he's saying Shanann has already become aware of the separation and now they're going to take it further. And of course that's not true. Shanann was under the impression when she arrived back from Arizona that they were going to move along with repairing their marriage. That was the impression she was under, which is not what he even mentions here. He is honest about there's another baby on the way, although maybe it would be better to say that Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant. Another baby on the way isn't, well, maybe I'm nitpicking a little bit on that score. But I'm just saying he could be a bit more accurate there, saying Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant. We spoke about the fact that we didn't feel that connection that we used to. Now, this is a lie. He's saying we didn't feel that connection, when in reality he didn't feel that connection. And he may be honest. It may be that Shanann also didn't feel that connection, and he may be being truthful in that way. But I don't think Shanann felt that way. Shanann felt that they did have a connection, that she didn't do anything wrong in a way, and that she still wanted to be married to him. And that, in her love letter to him, she said, always and forever. So she definitely wanted that connection to continue. She felt that there was still something, certainly from her side. So he's not being completely honest here about what she felt. He's putting words into her mouth. Then he says, we spoke about the notion that the love that we had at the beginning was no longer there. That's kind of a weird way of writing, isn't it? Talking about the notion. It's almost like he's read that somewhere. Anyway, that the love we had at the beginning was no longer there. Once again, he's talking about it as a mutual thing. We spoke about just staying together for the kids. That's true. That is something that they texted to one another, but realizing that normally doesn't work. He's also implying that she's also realized this. And then he says it was a very emotional conversation with crying on both parts. Now, in his sermon on the porch, I think he was asked, was it an emotional conversation? And then he said, I wouldn't say it was an emotional conversation, but he kind of minimizes it, that it wasn't very emotional, that it was emotional, but not very emotional. And now he's kind of emphasizing that it was a very emotional conversation. Now, if it was very emotional at 4 o'clock in the morning, you'd expect 2 or 3 things to have happened. First of all, you would have expected the neighbors to have heard it. If it was a very emotional conversation with crying and shouting and gnashing of teeth, you would have expected someone to have heard a kind of ruckus, because those houses are very close to one another, right? Now you might say, no, that it doesn't necessarily mean that, but I can tell you, if your neighbors are having a conversation about divorcing, right, and it ends up becoming a murder at 4 o'clock in the morning, it is very likely that you will hear something. If not the people shouting at one another, then the dog barking, or the children crying, or doors slamming, or cars revving, or whatever it is. And you have none of that. The other thing is that you'd expect the dog to bark, or the children to have gotten up, the children to be disturbed. And he doesn't mention anything here about that. That's also very curious, is that they have an emotional conversation at that time, and there's no sort of, they close the door, or they go into the basement to have the conversation, or they whisper, and then at one point they wake the children. Nothing about that. There's no reference to the children here other than indirectly. Then he says, when I got off the bed to go downstairs, she told me she was going to a friend's house and taking the kids there, but also that she would be back. That's quite an interesting thing, is because he's locating himself in the statement. He talks about, I got off the bed to go downstairs. Now, I wonder whether that's not a reference to him getting off the bed after he had phone sex with Kissinger, or spoke to Kissinger over the phone. It's possible that he did it upstairs. It could also have been in the lounge downstairs. But it's possible what he's saying there is true, that he was on the bed and then went downstairs. I don't necessarily think it's true in this case, in terms of what he's saying here, in terms of his scenario, but it is possible that it's broadly true, that he was on the bed at one point and then he went downstairs. When he talks about she was going to a friend's house and taking the kids there, that is kind of code for I took them to the well site and she was never coming back, right? Then we get to 5 a.m. He says, downstairs, and I made a protein shake, packed my lunchbox, filled my water jug. So he's talking about upstairs, downstairs. Now at 5 a.m., he's downstairs and he's making a protein shake. And that's quite interesting. That is kind of what he sees himself doing, making a protein shake. He packs his lunchbox. He doesn't say what with. It would be quite interesting to know. Does he pack some of those chicken, those barbecued chicken breasts into that? Would be interesting to know. 5:15, he backed his truck up in the. What did he say? Back my truck in to load up my book bag, lunchbox, water jug, container. So none of that really makes sense. Why would you back up your truck to load things like that? A book bag, lunchbox, water jug, all of that could be carried out virtually in one go. And then he talks about O-ring kit and loaded up various open-ended wrenches. Why would that really be necessary? And his neighbor would actually say that he never does that. But anyway, that is his story. And when you watch the video, the Trinasich video, he walks in and out quite a few times, easily 4, 5, 6 times. And so you've got to wonder what was actually going on every time he walked in and out. Then at 5:30 he says he departed for work. That's not true. So just to backtrack a little bit, he doesn't talk about loading a red gas can, right? He doesn't talk about anything about that. He doesn't talk about which door he left through. He doesn't talk about the last thing that he said to his wife. He doesn't talk about looking into his children. That's just not referred to at all. They're not referred to at all. They didn't wake up during the argument. They didn't do anything. They're not a factor, right? The fact that he backs his truck up, we know that he would never back his truck up while Shanann was in the house because Shanann didn't like it. Shanann thought it would wake up the children. The fact that he would back up his truck either indicates that the children were no longer alive or that it didn't matter for whatever reason if he backed his truck up. In other words, it didn't matter waking them up because they weren't going to be awake for much longer, kind of thing. Then he says at 5:30 a.m. he departed for work. That's also not true. He departed for work, I think, at 5:46. And just as he did, Betty Marcoux left for gym. And she said it was earlier than usual that he was leaving for work. So it's interesting that he gives the wrong time there. Then he says at 7:40 a.m. he texted Shanann. Now what's quite interesting here is he jumps from 5:30 to 7:40, and we know that a lot happened during that time. So in other words, we know that between 5:30 and 7:40 he disposed of 3 bodies. But instead of talking about what happened between 5:30 and 7:40, he just says departed for work, 3 lines. In fact, those 3, not 3 lines, 3 words, those 3 words look like, I think they're the shortest of the entire statement. Departed for work. Well, he did a lot more than depart for work. If we just go back up to between 2 and 4 a.m., there's a very short line there where he says, Shanann gets into bed with me. And then it jumps to 2 hours later. Did nothing happen in the night? Did he not get up to go to the bathroom? Did they not have sex? Did they not say anything to one another? Did she not reach out to touch him? Did he not reach out to touch her? Were the children not restless during the night at any point? Did she not look at her phone? Did he not look at his phone? Any of that stuff. And instead you just have this sort of jump, this 2-hour jump. I don't think so. Anyway, then he time jumps quite a lot. He goes from 5:30 to 7:40, and these are staged messages. Then he jumps from 7:40 to 12. He texted Shanann to call him. And then at 12:10, the doorbell visitor. So absolutely no reference here, no acknowledgement that he called Primrose School. and absolutely no reference, no acknowledgement that he called the realtor, right? He's just hoping that they're not going to check, that they're not going to make sure. And of course they are. Then he goes from 12:10 to 12:20, called Nicole to see what was going on, and she told me she couldn't get a hold of Shanann, and that her shoes were next to the door and her car was in the garage. Now, that's kind of also minimizing what is really going on. Nicole didn't call Watts because her shoes were next to the door and her car was in the garage. Nicole called Watts because Shanann had a doctor's appointment, she was pregnant, she'd expressed a lot of concerns and anxieties during the flight, and that was why she was quite worried about her, right? Not just because her shoes were there. Anyway, we now go to 1153. Then he says 12:40 p.m. A few more efforts by Nicole to reach her. I'm now on my way home to check on my family. I'm not sure if that's accurate. I don't know if he was on his way home at 1 o'clock. I'll tell you why, because he arrived home at, I think, 2:07. And it sort of takes around about 45 minutes to get from the work site to his house. Now, I can't be 100% about that because it depends. I don't know which work site he was at, and I don't know what the access situation was. But, I mean, he's just not accurate about his times here. He says, 2 p.m. I arrived home. In fact, he arrived home at 2:07. So he can be very accurate about certain times and then not accurate about others. Why can't he be accurate about why those extra couple of minutes? Well, part of it is when he was returning home, he disposed of evidence at Black Mesa, right? In a dumpster in Black Mesa, probably some of his clothing and that kind of thing. By the way, just something that I wish that Coda had asked Watts was like, every step of the way, what clothing were you wearing? So what clothes did you wear to the birthday party, right? And we kind of know what he was wearing. I think he was wearing a light blue Tar Heel shirt. What clothes did you wear after that, right? What clothes did you wear after that? And then kind of have what sort of, well, where are these clothes? Like, where are they? Are they in the laundry? Did you wash them? Are they hung up? I think that's quite an important part of investigations, and I think it's quite an underestimated part. The same with what was Shanann wearing? Did Shanann change clothes? Do you know that she changed clothes? That kind of thing. Anyway, he goes on to say, I arrive home, open the garage door, and get inside the house. He doesn't mention Coonrod. He doesn't mention just passing by him. He doesn't mention looking inside the vehicle when he arrived back. Then he says Shanann, Belle and Celeste are not in the house. Shanann's wedding ring is on her nightstand. So this is how he's trying to establish the narrative that he's writing down. He's trying to say, well, you know why Shanann's not home? She's left her wedding ring. She's accepted that we are separating, and she's not coming back. That's why she's left her ring. She's left her ring to say, I'm not coming back. This is a message to say, take your ring and I'm leaving, kind of thing. And then he says, her phone is on the couch. It wasn't on the couch. It was under pillows, sort of out of sight in the couch. And Chris Watts doesn't say who retrieved it. Certainly wasn't him. Then he says, her purse is still here. He doesn't say where that was found. The medicine for the kids is still here. The car with the car seats are still here. There's no sign of them anywhere. So he's just kind of very broadly saying what they sort of know. 3 p.m. Frederick police officer and detectives are asking Nicole and I questions about where she could have gone or she could be with. And now he's sort of jumping quite liberally. Jumps. It's like an hour. 3 o'clock, then 4 o'clock, then 5 o'clock, then 6 o'clock, then 7:30. He talks about 4 p.m. police check neighbor security footage and questioned them as well. I don't think that was at 4 p.m. I think he went to the neighbor at, I could be wrong, it was either 2:41 around there, because that was when he texted Kissinger something about OMG, that's crazy, or something like that, or that's so embarrassing. I can't quite remember what he texted her, but he was in front of the television standing opposite Coonrod when he sent that text. So I don't think that time is accurate either. Then he says 4 p.m. police check neighbor security footage and question them as well. 5 p.m. officer, detective and sergeant come in to search the house and ask some more questions. It's all very bland, no detail, no names. Then he says 6 o'clock, begin calling around to anyone I know that could know something or maybe seen Shanann. Calling local hospitals and hotels as well. He doesn't refer to calling the bank. He doesn't refer to his family calling him or her family calling him. 7:30, friends Nick and Amanda come by to show support. 8 o'clock, friend Lauren Arnold comes by to show support. 9 o'clock, friends Dave Colon and Jeremy Lindstrom come by to show support. 10 o'clock, I lay in bed and proceed to take calls from friends and family the rest of the night. And of course, he doesn't mention that he has another very long conversation with Kissinger that night and then on and into the next morning. He also doesn't talk about the phone calls that the police officers made that night to him and the next morning. And some of the questions they asked him were about infidelity. He doesn't refer to that either. So I hope you found that run through interesting. It's obviously not a lot that is written down, just 1.5 pages. But what is interesting to look at isn't what he writes, but what he doesn't write. And I often say the absence of evidence is evidence. And in a legitimate case where someone is innocent, they will tend to talk about the last thing that someone said to them, the last moment that they saw somebody. And that'll kind of be burned into their mind. And someone who doesn't want to remember someone who they've murdered is very likely to not say that because they don't want to remember those things. They don't want to even acknowledge that to themselves. Okay, I'm not going to take it further than that. For those interested, my book, my 100th book, Post-Truth, is available on Amazon Kindle. The first review is already up there. Go and check it out. I've also posted that review on Twitter. I'm quite happy with the first review. Also happy that the book reads quite quickly. If you guys want me to talk about the writing of the book, I can maybe do that in a live. I did actually take my patrons through the day-to-day behind-the-scenes writing of the book every single day. So I kind of wrote one chapter or so over around about 3 weeks. And every day I would take my patrons through what that was like, what was going on behind the scenes, what the whole writing process was like. So if you guys are interested in just a basic general summary of the behind the scenes, I can maybe do that in a live if you guys are interested. Again, thanks a lot for those of you who have subscribed. Bear in mind, on Patreon, there are 3 audiobooks that are kind of being uploaded at the moment. Post-Truth, I think, is up to chapter 17. Every day another chapter is uploaded. That's on the $10 tier. The Craven Silence is on the $5 tier. That's on the John Benet Ramsey case. That's just starting out. So every day another chapter is loaded. And then Murder Most Foul on Patrick Frazee, that's also on the $10 tier. So if you subscribe to the $10 tier, right now you kind of are getting 2 books for the price of 1. Not bad value. I know I must still do that analysis of the Amanda Knox thing. I will try and get to that. I've kind of gotten through most of the stuff I meant to get through on Chris Watts, so I don't see any reason why not to do that next. For those of you who are interested in the John Benet Ramsey case, I'm doing a timeline review. I think we're already at episode 7. So, and tomorrow, the 17th, it's really the timeline really starts to accelerate, and a lot happens on a day-to-day basis. So now is a good time to jump onto that sort of conveyor, because, we're only about a week away from Christmas. And if you think you know the John Benet Ramsey case, you'll probably be surprised at how much you thought you knew and how much you didn't know. Thank you for listening, and I will see you guys next time.